Hello everyone and welcome back to Channel Dad Bryon Lape Reads. And I haven't done a COVID video directly in a while. It's been a while. I've been concentrating on some other fitness stuff and some of those that are correlating to the lockdowns and some of it opening up and going back to the gym and things like that. And this is one that I thought this was a rerun, because I could have sworn this was released previously, but this is, well, it's from near the end of May, so I guess it is a rerun. This is a couple weeks late. But this is the kind of information that more and more, the doctors on the ground who were dealing with this directly, this is the kind of thing they were saying all over the place when they were allowed to speak. And we saw all kinds of censorship. We saw, videos pulled down and everything else, but the data is starting to really come out. Now, we can have a discussion as to whether or not COVID numbers are being overblown, over reported. What is the cause of death? What exactly does that mean? And but it's similar to things that are happening. I believe it's similar to what's happened in previous pandemic, anything, right? If someone has a condition of some sort, and then they get the flu and they die. Well, what killed them? Was it the flu or was it whatever they had? If they were, let's say, a cancer patient who had had a lot of chemotherapy and they were barely hanging on, and they get a cold or a flu or anything, they die from it. Is what killed them. I would argue in many ways that it's the cancer that really killed them. It's just that other illness was the last straw. But we've seen this with AIDS. We've seen it with other things where people will have compromised immune systems in some fashion, and then something comes along and it's just the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, right? And so what does kill them? That is a judgment call in many ways. And so, yeah, I think there's some over-reporting. I don't think the over-reporting is in the 50, 60%. It probably is in the 10. And a lot of it is just exposure now because of what the governments and other people have made of this pandemic, of how cause of death many times is very difficult to figure out, right? Someone who's healthy who dies in a car wreck because the car gets crushed and they get crushed inside and they die in that car wreck, that's a little bit easier than someone who's got 7 or 8 different illnesses or different things that are compromised with them, and then something takes their life. So but this is part of what's been over, and I think this is probably true with a lot of flus, but we don't really look at it this closely because of all the political nonsense going on with this. But Italy say 96% of coronavirus fatalities had other chronic illnesses. And I wouldn't be surprised if that other 4% were not perfectly healthy individuals who had I'd like to see, a little bit more research into that. And granted, a lot of this would require autopsies and other things, because people can have illnesses, but it doesn't affect them. Maybe they just feel kind of bad all the time, or some days, but they don't feel really, really bad, and they don't go to the doctor, right? And so maybe they have slight versions of things, and then COVID comes along, or any flu that's pretty nasty. I mean, COVID's a pretty nasty, COVID-19 is a pretty nasty one. And it's too much for the body to handle. So, but let's just take it for what it's worth. So this is 27th of May. So this is a few weeks ago. The overwhelming majority of deaths with coronavirus in Italy have occurred in the presence of 2 or more serious chronic illnesses, according to a report. And what's also the thing there in northern Italy is so much of this is in northern Italy. It's a very industrial area, very old area. They have higher rates of people with various chronic illnesses than the rest of the country. And a lot of industry, the air quality is poor, and all of that plays in. This is exactly what was going on there in Wuhan, where people just a few years ago were protesting against incinerators and other things. The air quality is horrible. A lot of the men who died were smoke. Apparently in China, many men over the age of 50 smoke very heavily and have for most of their life, especially over 60, and all this combined. So anyway, the Italian health authorities announced in a recent report that only 4.1% of fatalities testing positive for Wuhan happened in the absence of serious comorbidities. Now, serious comorbidities. So that, to me, this is very important that word is there, because you could have, I wouldn't say non-serious, but let's say less. I don't know what's less threatening than comorbidities, but you may have some things that are just making you feel like crap, right? They're not enough to kill you yet, but something comes along and boom. The average number of comorbidities among all Italian deaths in the coronavirus was 3.1. So again, individuals who are not very healthy for one reason or another, okay? Just 15% of fatalities occurred with the presence of just one, while 21.4 died with 2 other pathologies and 59.6 with 3 more. So you're almost at 60% at 3 or more. The most common comorbidities were arterial hypertension, so that's high blood pressure essentially. But it most likely, since this is a comorbidity, we're talking chronic high blood pressure. We're talking quite high. Probably on meds for years, salt-free diet, all that kind of stuff. Type 2 diabetes, so most likely, and hypertension too, you're most likely overweight, but that's not, I mean, my grandfather had hypertension most of his life, and he was not even close to overweight. I don't even think he was, I think he was below weight. Type 2 diabetes, most likely overweight with other chronic problems, probably joint issues and things like that as well. Asthmatic heart disease, or ischemic heart disease, I should say, atrial fibrillation. So we got 2 different various heart conditions here that are very serious. Chronic renal failure, and that chronic renal failure is you're basically just slowly dying. Okay, and it doesn't, depending on where you are on that chain, it may not take much to just get to the end. This is what I found very interesting. So the numbers are one thing, but then to see this chart, I would really like to know whether they're defining hypertension here. How high are we talking about? Are we talking about with people with, systolic? What is the systolic, especially the dystolic number, the number on the bottom? My grandfather had it, and my dad's dad. His was triple digits, right? So both numbers were in the triple digits. And normally 120/80 is considered like and now it used to be norm. Now it's like the upper end of norm. My blood pressure tends to be lower, in particular how much often I've been at the gym and things like that. But just naturally, my mom's blood pressure tends to be lower too. Type 2 diabetes. So this is most of the time, this is, chronic illness induced or dietary induced, so it's lifestyle choices over 30 years. People overweight since they were 12 or something, because, we can talk to Dr. Lustig. I would love to see him look at some of this stuff, because, I mean, he's a big sugar, he wants sugar to be banned, essentially, a controlled substance. So here we go all the way down through. So we have, this one I found interesting. So people in respiratory failure, chronic liver disease, things like that, very low. So, here I did all this stuff at the top. I guess this is just singular. COPD is actually kind of low from what I would expect, considering that the virus is mostly a respiratory issue. Now, when you start combining, it'd be interesting to see where the combinations are, and things like that, and how they contribute. So autoimmune disease. So here you hear AIDS patients, essentially, not just fully, because there's several different variants on autoimmune issues. Lupus is considered an autoimmune problem. The report also revealed an average age of 81, which has also been reported repeatedly among those who have died with coronavirus in Italy. One of the most astonishing findings of the report was only 1.1% of all coronavirus deaths in the country happened to people below the age of 50. More than 50. So, to me, this again is showing that this is an illness that has been created to target people who are sick, and quite sick. I wouldn't be surprised if people who were below 50 who died of it had some of these other issues. It's just that their body was still strong enough to ward off the virus. Or maybe they've got hydroxychloroquine or something like that really helped. A lot of people think it's been debunked, but that's crap. You look at those debunking reports and you look at, see, many times they're not giving enough. It has been shown that you have to do a very high dose for just a few days, very short time frame, and without zinc and without the Z-Pak, its effectiveness is only in like the 50% range. But you put those 3 together and it's like 98%. And even people with chronic stuff. Now, if they have liver failure, that much hydroxychloroquine that quickly might kill their liver or their kidneys. So it's not 100%. Okay, so and that's the way it goes. The total number of deaths with the disease have been 32.9. Okay, total recorded cases. So you're looking at a decent survivability. But again, this is why I think you've seen people that have been 100 years old and older who have survived. And if you look at them, and they're relatively healthy for their age, right? They may have some of these things, but they're not debilitating. The week Spain had revised down its official death count for the coronavirus by nearly 2,000 after discovering a series of reporting errors and duplications. And that, with the chaos of what caused this is again, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetency. So. And I find that now, granted, this is on Breitbart. You're going to have a lot of right, conservative type people on here reading stuff, but I'm not going to read the comments. But this has been, I think this is, again, I'm not going to say Cuomo did it on purpose, but I think this is why when we put people who were sick into nursing homes or in other isolation with people with other, because you typically in a nursing home is not you may be in assisted living if let's say you're on a few medications, but you can get around. Maybe you still drive, you're still competent. But if you're in a nursing home, you're usually pretty much close to death one way or the other. And it's really just trying to keep you comfortable and perhaps as long as alive as possible. It just depends what's going on. But you bring someone in with this and it just sweeps through there. And I think that's why we saw the high deaths. And they're just going to contribute to more of the findings that chronic illnesses are a huge contributing factor. And, that kind of thing is going to propel this along as to exactly what we do about it. And why I think the hydroxychloroquine sometimes doesn't work, because if your body's shut down for various things, that amount of medication really short is just going to be overpowering. When you look at how some of the things that they do for like dogs and thing when they put pets down that have chronic, they're not coming back, a lot of it is really, really high doses of antibiotics and a few other things. It just overwhelms their system, and it's very calming, and then they just pass away. So in many ways, this is kind of what's happening here is you have people with these various chronic, especially 3 or more in that high percentage, and this is just too much for the system to handle. And so again, I go back to, well, what ultimately kills them? Maybe it's corona, maybe it's not. As far as cause of death, really it was the liver failure that did it, but someone got pushed over the edge with this disease. So we'll take that with a grain of salt and a reflection, and move forward and drop all the conspiracy nonsense. I don't think it was released on purpose. Yes, I think it's a straight. It definitely goes back to Fauci and his U.S. lab when Obama shut him down, and then he moved it to Wuhan. I think it's a direct result of his thing, but I think it's just an accident. It got out. And then the festival, the community eating festival, was just a flashpoint. And it just sparked, it's just magnesium. It burned really hot and bright, got everybody freaked out. And we did a lot of stupid things. Governments around the world did things that, even though the research repeatedly shows over and over and over again, does not work. Lockdowns do not work. Isolation of the ill and the most, so basically the people who had this should have been isolated, and the people who are most vulnerable, the people with these illnesses, should have been separated from people who are sick. And that's the way it should be handled. And that's the way we've handled every pandemic over the last 100 years or more. And for whatever reason, we did stupid things this time, and the immune system, the people have not been able to build up herd immunity like they have in the past. So there we go. So thank you very much for stopping by. What do you think of this? Do you think this is still a bunch of baloney? I think this is exactly what I expected. This is kind of stuff I was saying back in February, late February, early March, when this was starting to kind of come out of China, and we didn't know exactly what was going on. There were some people with some medical background that disagreed, and they still vehemently disagreed with me on this, even though the data has borne me out. The only remaining part that I said back then, I said, I think we're going to find out this was just a bad flu season, but it wasn't worse. And so far, knock on wood, the data is that way. We've had worse pandemics in the last 5 years than this. And then when you look at it historically against others, and you start comparing by the raw numbers aren't there, but especially when you start comparing by the number of people in the population, because the population growth over the last 100 years, this isn't even close to stuff in 68 and 69 with the Hong Kong flu, let alone what we have the Spanish flu. It's not even close. Now, the Spanish flu had a lot of extenuating circumstances too. You've got World War I. You've got a lot of troops that have been exposed to various agents and things in the field. Many of them come back with it. It's very interesting that the phase 2 that a lot of people are afraid of, which I don't think is going to happen with this one, follows Philadelphia and New York, two major ports that where people were coming in, and then it just followed the railroads as troops were going home, riding the rails back to wherever they lived. and then it spread out from there. And that definitely tells me that that phase 2 was caused by the returning troops more than anything else, and not because. And then they went on a pseudo lockdown, nothing like what we did. We destroyed our economy over nothing. And I think long term, over the next 5 years, the damage is going to cause far more death and destruction to people than the virus would have had we just treat it like we did every other pandemic. Don't ignore it. It is very serious, but we don't know how to freak out. We could have treated it much better. So let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we will see you. Goodbye. Yeah, it might help if I unmute. Okay. Levels look pretty good, although probably a little bit down. All right. Yeah, I can stand away from it further or something. I don't know. Yeah, I did way too much talking last night, but that's my fault. A little higher. There we go. Better. 3, 2, 1.